Divorced at 42, she bought an old farmhouse for $20 and what she found inside changed everything. Emily Carter found herself in rural Montana, standing at the edge of a gravel road that seemed to lead nowhere and everywhere at the same time. The sky above her was enormous. The kind of sky that makes a person feel small in a way that isn't humiliating but freeing, like finally taking up the right amount of space. She had arrived that morning in a battered sedan with a suitcase full of clothes that didn't feel like hers anymore, and a bank account that had been reduced to numbers she couldn't look at without flinching. The divorce had been final for 6 weeks, but the loneliness had started years earlier, long before the papers were signed, long before her husband had looked across the dinner table and said, "I don't think I love you the way I used to." That sentence had landed like a stone in still water, and everything had rippled outward from there. She had given 18 years to a man who had slowly, quietly, chosen distance over presence. There was no affair, no dramatic fight, just the slow erosion of two people who had forgotten how to see each other. When it ended, Emily lost the house in Bozeman, the friends who felt obliged to pick sides, and most of her sense of who she was. What remained was a small amount of cash, a heart that felt both overfull and hollow, and a strange, stubborn instinct that had been whispering to her for months, "Go somewhere empty, find somewhere no one else wants." So when she found the listing, a handwritten note pinned to a bulletin board in a small-town diner, advertising an abandoned farmhouse for $20, she didn't overthink it. She drove 3 hours without telling anyone, met an elderly woman at a county office who handed her a rusted key and said, "Nobody's set foot in that place since 1987, and signed her name on a deed that costs less than a meal. But what nobody knew was that inside the old farmhouse, hidden in a space that had been sealed for decades, something was waiting for her, something that would force her to rethink everything she believed about loss, purpose, and the quiet courage of beginning again. *** Before we continue, if you've ever found yourself standing at the edge of something uncertain, wondering if it's too late to start over, take a breath. This story is for you. Emily had not always been alone. There was a time, in her 20s, when she had believed that marriage was a kind of shelter, a place where two people stored their hopes and kept each other warm. She had met Daniel at a bookstore in Missoula where they had both reached for the same novel, and she had taken that as a sign. For the first decade, things were good. Not perfect, but good. They bought a small house with a porch that sagged in the middle. They talked about children, though they never had them. They built a life that looked, from the outside, like the kind of life people were supposed to want. But somewhere around year 12, something shifted. Daniel grew quiet in a way that wasn't peaceful but absent. He stopped asking about her day. He stopped noticing when she changed her hair or when she stayed up late reading in the living room. Emily tried harder. She planned dinners, suggested weekend trips, left notes on the bathroom mirror. Nothing worked. The silence between them became a third presence in the house, something they both had to walk around. By year 15 she had stopped crying. By year 17 she had stopped trying to fix it. The divorce, when it came, was less like a wound and more like an amputation, something she knew she would survive, but that would leave her moving differently for the rest of her life. She moved into a small rental apartment with thin walls and neighbors who argued at midnight. She took a job at a coffee shop, though she had once managed a small marketing team. She learned that shame is not loud. Shame is quiet. It is the voice that says, "You should have been enough." She heard that voice every morning when she woke up and every night before she fell asleep. But Emily had one thing that the divorce had not taken from her. Her father, a carpenter who had passed away 5 years earlier, had taught her something when she was young. He had taught her that every structure, whether a house, a relationship, or a life, needs a foundation that can hold weight. He had taught her to look at something broken and see not what it was missing, but what it still had. "You don't throw things away just because they're tired," he used to say. "You figure out what's still true, and you build from there." Emily had not thought about that lesson in years, but as she stood in front of the abandoned farmhouse, with the Montana wind moving across the open fields and the smell of dry earth and wild sage in the air, she remembered, and that remembering would become the most important thing she carried with her. The farmhouse sat at the end of a long dirt driveway, flanked by 2 cottonwood trees that had grown old and crooked. The structure was small, maybe 900 square feet, with a tin roof that had rusted in patches and a front porch that listed to one side like a tired animal. The windows were dark, some of them broken, their glass replaced by boards and decades of dust. The paint, once white, had weathered to a pale gray that blended into the Montana prairie. Emily pushed open the front door, which groaned but did not resist. Inside, the air was cool and still. A small kitchen with a porcelain sink and a cast-iron stove that hadn't been lit in decades. A living room with a stone fireplace and floorboards that creaked under her weight. 2 bedrooms at the back, their doors hanging crooked on their hinges. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust and the quiet evidence of abandonment. A forgotten chair, a stack of yellowed newspapers, a coffee cup left on a windowsill as if someone had intended to return. But what struck Emily most was not the decay. It was the silence. The noise of life fades away in places like this. The constant hum of traffic, of phones, of other people's expectations, all of it dissolves. What remains is something she had not felt in years, a stillness that felt less like emptiness and more like permission. She spent the first night in the living room, wrapped in a sleeping bag on the floor, listening to the wind move through the cottonwood trees. She did not light a fire. She did not turn on a light. She just lay there, in the dark, and let the quiet settle into her bones. Some places feel like they were waiting for someone. Emily did not know yet if this was one of them, but something about the farmhouse felt less like a project and more like a conversation she had not known she needed to have. The next morning she began to explore. She walked through each room slowly, running her hands over the walls, the window frames, the old wooden cabinets in the kitchen. She was looking for something, though she could not have said what. In the smaller of the 2 bedrooms, she noticed that the floor felt different near the closet, not uneven, exactly, but hollow. She knelt down and pressed her palm against the floorboards. One of them shifted. She worked her fingernails into the gap and pried it up. Beneath the board was a dark space, roughly 2 feet square, lined with old newspaper. Inside the space sat a small wooden box, no larger than a shoebox, its surface dark with age. The box was not locked, but it was sealed shut by decades of dryness. Emily carried it into the living room, where the morning light fell across the stone hearth. She sat on the floor with the box in her lap. Her hands were steady. She opened the lid. Inside, wrapped in a piece of faded fabric, were 3 items. A woman's silver locket, tarnished but intact. A small leather pouch containing 6 gold coins, each one stamped with a date from the early 1900s, and a letter, folded tightly, the paper soft and yellowed at the edges. The handwriting on the envelope was elegant but trembling. The hand of someone who had written the words slowly, deliberately, perhaps knowing they would be read long after she was gone. The letter was dated August 12, 1952. My name is Margaret Doyle. I lived in this house for 31 years, from 1921 until the spring of 1952, when I became too ill to stay. I am writing this on a Tuesday evening. The sun is setting behind the cottonwoods, and I can hear the meadowlarks outside the window. I want you to know that this house saved my life. I came here after my husband passed. He was a farmer, a good man, but he worked himself into an early grave, and I did not know how to be alone. I thought solitude would break me. Instead, it rebuilt me. I learned that silence is not the absence of sound. It is a different kind of company. I learned that a woman alone is not a tragedy. She is a beginning. I saved these coins over the years, a little at a time, from the eggs I sold and the mending I did for neighbors. I do not have children. I do not have family. I am leaving this for whoever comes next. Take it, use it. But more than the money, I leave you this. Do not wait for someone to tell you that you belong. You belong because you are here. This house will hold you if you let it. Be brave, be gentle with yourself. The meadowlarks will sing for you, too. ****. Margaret Doyle mentally read the letter 3 times. On the first reading, she held her breath. On the second, tears ran down her face without her permission. On the third, she laughed, a small, surprised sound that echoed off the stone walls. She sat there for a long time, the locket warm in her palm, the gold coins cool against her skin. She thought about Margaret Doyle, a woman she would never meet, who had sat in this same room and felt the same fear, and had chosen to stay anyway. In that moment, Emily understood something she had been trying to learn for years. Time feels slower in places like this, not because nothing happens, but because what happens matters more. The transformation did not happen quickly. It happened in small, deliberate acts that accumulated like Margaret's coins, one repair at a time. one decision at a time. Emily used part of the money from the gold coins to buy materials. She replaced the rotted porch boards with new pine, sanding each one until it was smooth to the touch. She patched the holes in the roof with sheets of galvanized steel, working carefully in the afternoons when the sun was not too hot. She cleaned the stone fireplace, scraping away decades of soot, and lit the first fire on a cool September evening. The flames caught slowly, then steadied, and the warmth that spread through the living room felt less like heat and more like a welcome. She painted the kitchen cabinets a soft cream color, hung new curtains in the windows, and planted a small garden in the yard. Tomatoes and rosemary in a single rosebush she found half dead near the well. She watered it every morning, and by the following spring it bloomed. The space began to reflect who she became. The walls, once bare, now held a few photographs: her father in his workshop, the meadow outside the kitchen window, a small framed copy of Margaret's letter, the bookshelf, which she built herself from reclaimed wood, filled slowly with novels and field guides, and the journals she started keeping. She wrote about the weather, the birds, the way the light changed across the prairie. She wrote about Margaret. She wrote about her own fear and how, day by day, it was becoming something else, something that felt less like a wall and more like a door dot in the present. Emily Carter is 40. She has lived in the farmhouse for 4 years. The roof no longer leaks. The porch no longer sags. The garden produces more tomatoes than she can eat, and she leaves baskets of them on the counter for the neighbors she has come to know, a retired rancher named Bill, a young couple who moved from Chicago 2 years ago, the woman at the general store who saves the Sunday paper for her. Emily works from home now, restoring old furniture for clients who find her through a small website she built herself. She does not make much money, but she makes enough. She wakes every morning to the sound of meadowlarks and the sight of sunlight moving across the cottonwood trees. The silence that once terrified her now feels like an old friend. In places like this, just being is enough. Nothing needs to be proven. Nothing needs to be fixed. The house is no longer abandoned. It is a home, and on the mantel above the fireplace, next to Margaret's silver locket, sits a small handwritten note that Emily wrote to herself on the night she finished the last repair. You are not lost. You are exactly where you were supposed to end up sometimes. Late in the evening, when the wind is soft and the light is low, Emily sits on her porch and thinks about the woman who came before her. Margaret Doyle, who had been alone and afraid and had chosen to stay. Margaret, who had hidden the box beneath the floorboards, not because she expected anyone to find it, but because she needed to believe that someone would. Emily understands now that what she found was never really about the coins or the locket. It was about the proof that someone else had stood in the same place, felt the same fear, and had not been destroyed by it. That is the gift that old places give us. They remind us that we are not the first to be broken, and we will not be the last to heal. The farmhouse is quiet tonight. The meadowlarks have gone to sleep. The stars are coming out one by one over the Montana prairie, and Emily Carter, divorced at 42, alone and then not alone, sits in the stillness and smiles. Because the noise of life fades away out here, what remains is not emptiness, it is peace, and that, she has learned, is more than enough.